for better or for worse, when we look at the ads, it's important to realize like there's a misconception out there that like ads are like Tinkerbell's pixie dust, right? You just like sprinkle it over something that's crap and all of a sudden magic happens and you're like, whoa, this is what ads are, amazing. And so one thing that we have to like consciously iterate to the clients that we work with or the people that we're thinking about is ads are one part of a much bigger, it's like 20% of the actual play of the customer acquisition process.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the High Level Spotlight Sessions, where we showcase awesome marketers doing awesome marketing. Today, I'm excited to be joined by Nick Kusmich. He's the founder of H2H Media Group, an agency that has some of the highest reported ROIs in the industry. Nick, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Chase, thanks for having me. I'm really looking forward to hanging out and chatting here with you.
I'm excited to chat with you as well. Highest ROIs in the industry is a big claim to make. It's on your website, and I was like, man, I can't wait to dig in. I love a good, bold statement. So talk to me about that. I mean, at what point did you get confident enough to say that publicly?
So I'm a marketer, right? Let's just throw the disclaimer out there that I'm a marketer. And so marketing has to be done in a certain way. But part of our thing, like one of our pitches that we always take is like, look, marketers lie, but numbers don't, right? And so one of the things that we're really important on is tracking all of our metrics, all of our data, all of that. Now, when I say the highest ROIs in the industry, some of that is unsubstantiated in the sense like you can't do a cross section of every ROI that's ever happened, et cetera, et cetera. But in all of our industry friends and everybody that we've worked with, I mean, our highest ROI was just over 32,000%. But let me just kind of throw this out there. Like now that it's marketers talking to marketers or agency people talking to agency people, like,
yeah, you're amongst colleagues here. So
exactly. So for that context, and I think this is even just a good lesson to learn is that, my good friend Todd Herman talks about like the field of play, right? If I choose to play someone else's sport on their field, I'm confined to their rules. If I choose to create my own field of play, I set the rules and it's a game that only I can win. So what I mean by that is how do I get the highest ROIs in the industry? Well, it's actually not all that difficult because we're very selective of who we work with as an agency client. So like what we usually tell people is we're not good with helping people start. We're good with helping people scale. That's a really big difference.
Which
right?
I think is good advice across the board. I always encourage folks that, if you're just getting started, don't work with startups, right? You're just setting yourself up.
Too much of a headache. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So like we're a scale agency. And again, when I say agency, we're talking about like meta ads. So we run ads for platforms and then we also teach and train and consult, which is another reason why I like high level. It serves us on both sides. But we stack the ads in our favor. So we only work with companies that are doing well already, and then we can come in and really help them scale. Perfect example of that is a company by the name of Dow Janes. They're two gals who teach women's financial literacy, hence the name Dow Janes, which I love.
That's smart.
Yeah. But when they came to us, they were like, Nick, we're spending about $1,000 a day on Facebook and we just can't get past that. Can you help us? I said, absolutely. Now, 15 months later, we're spending $42,000 a day on Facebook for them. So like, again, we're not the people taking from $0 to $1,000 a day, but we're certainly the people taking from $1,000 to $42,000 a day. So number one. Number two, I don't work in the e-commerce space. Like if I had to sell a $47 trinket on Meta platform, there's no way in hell I'm going to have the highest ROIs in the industry because there's just not enough margins. But when our clients sell $25,000, $50,000, $120,000 a year programs, it's not all that hard to get extremely high ROIs, right? So look, again, the whole point I think I'm saying, Chase, is like, I just stack the odds in my favor. I create my own field of play. I choose the clients I want to work with. I choose, how much we charge those clients. I choose the field of play, the rules around that, which again, allows us to then come around and say, hey, we've got some great results and here's the numbers to prove it kind of thing.
I love it. I love getting to chat with folks who work with companies that are already growing like this, because I feel like we're going to get some insights from you that maybe if I'm just getting started, I'm working with my local chiropractors or whatever, there's typically not enough ad spend in play to really flush out trends like you could see when you're moving big units, like
Sure.
it sounds like you're doing with some of the companies that you work with. So what are some of those things? You know, you approach a new client, you're like, okay, looks good, passes my filters, they're in growth stage, I think I can really help them.
Yeah.
Are there like a top 3 mistakes or things that aren't happening that you immediately go to and say, okay, here's where we start. This is always the lowest hanging fruit that moves the needle the most?
That's such a great question. Yeah. So I think if we rewind one step, and you said something that I really like there, is like when we're analyzing if we're going to work with a client, like there's a few very important questions that we ask the client right out of the gate. And that is like, what is your CAC? What's your cost per customer acquisition? Or you know, depending on the terminology, different people use terminologies. But what's your like CPA, your cost per acquisition for a client or a customer? Or what's your CAC, your customer acquisition cost? And then another question we simply ask is, how much are you spending generally to acquire a customer, which is kind of similar. And then what is your like lifetime LTV? It's important, lifetime value, but also like your year-long value of a customer. And you'd be surprised, Chase, like when we ask simple questions like that, people who are doing advertising on the internet, and they say, Chase, I have no idea. Like,
Yep.
How are you doing advertising then? Like advertising is math. It's simple economics. If you know what your customer acquisition cost is, and you come to us and say, okay, I know what my customer acquisition cost is. You have an unlimited budget. As long as you can get me customers under this amount, then it's a win-win for everybody, right? So I think for all agencies kind of paying attention here, like set your rules, know what questions to ask, and be okay to say no to someone who doesn't just meet your criteria, because you're in for a whole heap of headache if someone's like, I don't know my numbers, I don't really know how much I can spend, I don't know my budget. Nick, what do you suggest? And then you get into a whole kind of heap of a situation there. So I think that's like an important thing that you reminded me of when you know, we're talking to clients up front. Then secondly, and again, I'm in the advertising space, so the process is a little bit different. But before we ever onboard a client, I'll have an initial onboarding call with them, a discussion call to see if we're a good fit. And I tell them right before the call, I say, look, at the end of this call, we can't start. Your next step is to give me access to your ad account so I can dive in there and know if you're lying to me or not about the numbers that you're doing, because most people like to inflate their numbers. And B, I want to look in that ad account to see if we can actually bring any value to you. Because if you've got an amazing setup and you've got great media buying and everything is really dialed in, there could be a small chance that we can actually help you. Now, I haven't found that yet, but I want to be sure if we're going to engage in a client, it's the old Joe Polish saying of like, if you could only get paid after you deliver a result, how would that change your business? So that's kind of the mindset that I approach. It's like, I'm going to pretend I don't collect a retainer and I only get paid if I provide a result. So I have to be pretty darn sure that I can provide that result. So I jump in the ad account, I kind of take a look at what's going on. And one of the things I immediately see, and I apologize if you're not running ads and the languaging I'm about to use might be over your head, but essentially, I can tell within a minute of being in someone's ad account, like simple ad account hygiene, like are campaigns set up correctly or not? Because if they're not, they're bleeding money every single day. And if they are, then we look at the next stage. So that's kind of like mistake number one is people who just don't have any idea what they're doing. They have their ad account.
Can you give us an example of what a red flag would be of somebody who's not set up correctly and is probably bleeding money?
Love that. A couple of key things like, on the higher end, one thing is having multiple ads in an ad set. So one of the first things I look for is if you're running a campaign, an ad set in an ad, how many ads do you have in an ad set? Most people have 3, 4, 5, 6, because that's how we're taught to split test. But then when you dive into the analytics of that and you look at it, you'll see that Facebook arbitrarily decided to show ad 2 14 times more than the other 2 ads. And you're like, I'm trying to run a split test here. Facebook, you're just making decisions on my behalf here. That's not spreading it out. Not to mention when you look in the ad account, the one that Facebook spends the most money on oftentimes is not the one giving you the best result. So you're like, come on, Facebook, I thought we're on the same team. So like red flag number one is if you have multiple ads in an ad set on a new campaign that you're testing, you're most likely bleeding money because Facebook is distributing the wrong ad. Simple things like automatic placements, or what Facebook calls Advantage Plus placements. It makes it sound like it's the right button to click. But here's the thing. Facebook wants to spend your money, right? This is how they generate money, is through the ads platform. When you select Advantage Plus placements, in other words, Facebook, you decide where you want to show this ad. all sorts of heaps of problems happen because there's cheap placements like Audience Network, for example, that Facebook loves to bleed money into, but it's the worst type of traffic that you can get, particularly on a brand new cold campaign. Now it can work for warm or retargeting, but for cold, avoid it like the plague. And yet most people, I jump into the ad accounts. What's the first thing I see? Advantage Plus placements. And I see bleed happen all the time. Simple things. Maybe one other thing just to kind of throw out there is like people will put language and then like all, for example. Now that's not that big of an issue, but if you're targeting the USA and English speaking like speakers,
you just gave Facebook an excuse to waste your money.
Yeah. And guess what? Other non-English speaking audiences are cheaper and Facebook loves to distribute to them because it's cheap traffic and they'll spend your ad spend. And yet, I don't know, I'd say 90% of the time I jump in there, most people have just left the languages open. And again, it's not that it's that big of a deal, but that's more bleed, right?
Sure.
So right out of the gate, we've identified things where if you did nothing except fix those things, you'd recover a good portion of your ad spend and you start spending it more intelligently, for example. So that's one example of something that we kind of look for right out of the gate.
That's great. I love that. And I'd love to recap a couple of things so far that I've heard. I always preach to distance yourselves. Like people ask me, how would you do this or whatever? I'm like, start with high level and then make your upsells add-ons if you're going to do ad packages or whatever, because you're always the first on the chopping block. Running ads for clients can be very scary unless you're doing it the right way. And I think we've talked about several things already that change that and make it way less scary in my mind, because one, don't work with startups, look for businesses. It's almost like choose the lowest hanging fruit.
Yes.
But two, I'm more impressed already because speaking with lead gen marketers like yourself, oftentimes are not as obviously operating under integrity. Like when I hear you say things like, yeah, I'm going to get in there and make sure that I can provide value to you. And if, it doesn't happen very often, but I might see that you're doing great already. And I'll say, you know what, I'm not confident I'm going to move the needle for you.
Yeah. That's
the kind of stuff that makes running ads work. Right. And even if you go into the land where you said you don't like to go, which is, you don't have no idea what it costs to acquire a client, just saying, hey, I'll help you figure that out first.
Sure.
And it might be way too much, way more than you're willing to spend, but at least you'll know. Like that to me is running ads for people with integrity. So
yeah, I love that you bring that up, because like, here's something I tell people all the time, and it's maybe half a badge of honor and maybe like half something I shouldn't tell people. But like, well, in the early days, when you're getting started out, you're like, I'll take every client I can. I don't care. What do you do? It doesn't matter. I'll help you. I'll help you. I'll help you. I'll help you. And very quickly, it's an opportunity to like rise up the ranks real quick, but simultaneously, two things that I recognize real quick. Number one is reputation is like an ROI you can't really measure. And we're in the measurement business, of course. Like we want to know, hey, direct response, what's working? Something like reputation can't be measured, but you have one bad mess up with one decent person and they start talking bad about you, about their experience or whatever, like it's game over, right? Especially on the internet today. And so one of the claims that I make, and again, I don't know if this is a good claim or not, but I have probably refunded more people, both our fees plus the spend that we spent against them, that most people or most agencies have generated in a year. So I'll give you a great example of this. We took on a client, and this was like 4 or 5 years ago. This was my bad due diligence. It was a really big name client. I'm not going to share the name because for privacy reasons, but a big name client. Everyone in the space knows who they are. I was like, I love working with big clients because part of my ego is like, well, I can tell people that I work with this person. We did some quick analysis on the onboarding, and then the numbers weren't lining up. But I kind of pushed that to the side and was like, but it's a great client anyways. They know what they're doing. They're crushing it, just because the numbers don't line up, whatever, because I did the original onboarding. Anyways, long story short, we did a mini launch with them. I think I spent about 50 grand in ads over a 30-day period. So not too much, but not too little. And the whole thing, Chase, I'll tell you, was a disaster. Like everything went bad. Now, keep in mind, in a launch scenario, we charge about 20 grand to run ads for that month because it's all hands on deck. Plus, we spent about 50 grand. So this is 70 now grand kind of being played with here. It was such a bad experience. And again, this is a high profile person, but I bit my pride, and I refunded them the 20 grand that I spent, like that was our fees. And I took a hit on that, all my team that I had to pay for to do that. We screwed up. That's on me. And because we screwed up so royally, I refunded him the 70 grand in his ad spend out of my pocket.
Wow.
Now that hurt like hell, Chase. I'm telling you, that was not fun. That was a lesson I would never want to learn again. Unfortunately, I'm a very slow lesson learner. But the point I'm trying to make with that is I could have just been like, well, sorry, here's a refund of this. I'm sorry I spent 70 grand of yours. But I turned the table and I said, well, what if I was in those shoes? What would make things whole? And that just was it. So I bring that up to say is like, a lot of us don't recognize the importance of like reputation, of brand equity. And yeah, maybe we'll never work with that individual again, but at least now they'll only have good things to say about us when they're talking to their friends. And I think that's kind of an unmeasured element of running an agency and like trying to grow business, is that if we think long-term, as much as it hurts, we've got to own our own mistakes, make some decisions that way. And then, you know, it end up paying back to you some way, some form down the road.
Totally. I know, you know, and I don't know how many folks would do that, even if they had the money to give it back. But that's one of the other reasons why when I talk about ads, I'm like, be careful, because it's high stakes. You know, when you're running ads for people, it is high stakes.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's get back to the process. So you jump in, you look for red flags in the setup.
Yes.
What about messaging? Do you see, when you're looking at the ads themselves, are you just always like garbage, or, you know, do you have sort of stuff you know works and you just always transplant that in? Talk to me about your process when you start.
Yeah, I love that. And thank you for asking that question. So one of the things, like one of the major problems now, you know, for better or for worse, when we look at the ads, it's important to realize like there's a misconception out there that like ads are like Tinkerbell's pixie dust, right? You just like sprinkle it over something that's crap, and all of a sudden magic happens and you're like, whoa, this is what ads are, amazing. Like, and so one thing that we have to like consciously iterate to the clients that we work with, or the people that we're thinking about, is ads are one part of a much bigger, it's like 20% of the actual play of the customer acquisition process. And so one of my interests when I'm looking at an account, yes, we're looking at the ads and the messaging, and I'll speak to that in just a second. But what I'm also looking at is like, what is the actual entire process look like? So for example, there was one client of ours who came to us who's running a great business, is a high ticket business. They help men, you know, improve their personal development. They do that through events, and it's a high ticket thing that they sell through the end of a phone call funnel. And right when I looked at it, even before we decided to work together, I said, look, let's just call him Tom. Tom, before we ever work with you, I'm going to show you a few things that you probably want to implement on your funnel before we ever get started, to give you a little boost in things right away. And he said, sure, shoot them over. I shot them a Loom video. Their team went and deployed it. And even before starting, they saw an increase in 13% in their conversion rates, just from some few things funnel wise. But then
so let me pause you right there, because I love that. To me, this is my favorite way to land clients, which is, hey, whether you work with us or not, here's some free advice or some free tips or some free stuff that you could act on to improve your business.
Right.
It immediately diffuses any stress or pressure around the sale.
Yeah.
So I love that you took the time to do that ahead of time.
Yeah. That's the same thing with the onboarding video too. It's like, whether they work with us or not. And we had one person just recently say, Nick, thank you so much for that video. We gave it to our team. They already saw some improvements. We're not going to move ahead with you, but thanks for the help. And I'm like, no problem. Like, good. I'm glad. And that's further coins deposited into the reputation account. So all good there. But yeah, one of the mistakes we see about the messaging, the two mistakes we'll see is, one, an incongruency in the messaging with the rest of the funnel, right? Because most people's mistake with ads is that they treat it as clickbait. Like they'll say whatever they need to say and angle it whatever they need to angle it. And then there's just a non-congruency when they hit the landing page and when they hit the other points of the funnel. And as a result of that, I mean, in our world, we call it ad scent, you know, the incongruency of something. If somebody sees an ad and it's represented a certain way and it's got certain branding and colors and all the rest of that, and then they land on another page that's like completely different, remember, the critical mind immediately goes to, this is not safe. Something's wrong here. I'm abandoning ship.
Mm.
And it's something as simple as font choice, colors, like just a congruency in the whole thing. Second thing is about the messaging. Like if your messaging on the ad's all about, hey, we'll show you X, Y, Z, and then you get to the other page and the X, Y, Z is not related to the first thing, it's like, oh, that's kind of weird. So I think a congruency in messaging is obviously very important. The other big mistake that I see a lot of people make is when they look at their ads, they don't recognize the role of the ad itself. So what I say is, in a funnel, every stage of the funnel has its role to play. Allow it to play its role. Otherwise, you start getting things all messed up. So like the role of the sales call is to convert the prospect into a client, right? We get that. The role of the page before is to get someone to schedule the call. The role of the page before that, let's call it an opt-in page, has nothing more to do except to capture the lead and put them into your funnel. And then the ad before that, its actual objective is to pique curiosity, qualify the prospect, and to get the click. But so many times I see people using the ad to try to sell the thing from the sales call. And you're like, whoa, 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 you just skipped 4 or 5 steps all the way to the end. And you're trying to sell your thing via the ad. That's not actually the role of the ad itself. The role
I
of the ad
love
is to
that.
start the process.
And I feel like I see this all the time where you hit a page and there are 3 calls to action. Because it's like, oh, do you want to claim the lead magnet?
Right.
Or you could call us, or you could request more information or book a call, right? And it's like, no, you got to like make the page about one thing that you want them to do and recognize that there are steps to a sales funnel, right? Like it'd be great if we could just jump to the close, but 90% of the time, that's not realistic.
Thanks for bringing that up, because a lot of times people will come to me and say, Nick, can you look at my ads? What's wrong with them? And that's the thing. Like you're selling the thing from the ad and you're wondering why it's not working. Like, and this is old. And I used to talk about this a decade ago, but I think it's still worth mentioning. Like, keep in mind when we're dealing with Meta, right? So Facebook, Instagram right now, when we are dealing with Meta, nobody wakes up in the morning with our phone in our hand saying, I've got my credit card out. I'm going to go on Meta to see what I could buy. Right? Like nobody does that. It's a social media platform. Yeah. So if we understand that context, just that in and of itself, that Facebook is not a commerce-driven transactional platform. eBay, yes. Amazon, yes. Craigslist or whatever, yes. It is fine to be salesy on those platforms because people do go on with their credit card ready to buy. They're looking to buy on those platforms. Facebook's not like that. So if you come across as overly salesy or aggressive, particularly in an information product world, like maybe e-commerce, fine, quick and dirty sale or something low ticket, people will buy. But if you're talking about a higher value offer, like if you're an agency person trying to sell agency services, like the worst kind of ad you can do, and I'm sorry if this offends, but it's like, hey, schedule a discovery call with me right now so that we can decide, we can sell you on our services. It's like too much, too early, right? So I think if you just understand the context of the platform that you're on, that will inform your content, and then you can start working with that to start getting better results.
So let's talk about that. So you mentioned if you're an agency owner trying to get more business for yourself.
Yes.
No one's going to just book a discovery call with you.
Yeah.
I feel like this is a lesson that took me a long time to learn. And 2 people stand out in my mind that I feel like taught it to me, which were Rand Fishkin and Gary Vee.
Okay.
Which was give them the information up front. And most people are scared to do that because it's like, why would they pay me to do the thing? It's like, because they're not going to do it themselves. I promise you. Right? So is that an example of what you're talking about? Don't run an ad like book a call with me. Run an ad saying, I know what your first problem is. It's this, and here's how you should fix it. And then, your funnel is the next thing or whatever. Yeah. And people will just gravitate towards you as the person that can solve their problem.
Yeah, very much so. And then you could see it in one of 2 ways. I mean, you could use that as a lead generator, right? So if like when I first started my agency years ago, gosh, over a decade ago, and we were using ads to try and populate leads, there were 2 things we did. One, we had a consumer's guide to choosing an agency, right? And the reason we put that out in the first place was because we realized that a lot of people were being duped by agencies, like you were saying, Chase, right? There's a lot of shysters out there. And so we had this guide that said the 13 questions you must ask an agency before you ever sign a contract to work with them. And it was simple, like, don't get locked into anything over a month retainer. Do they do this? What do they know about this? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, of course, most of those things were stacked in our favor because these were all things that we could help you with. But even if they didn't, they had something powerful in front of them that they could use to interview agencies with. And here's the best part. If they download a guide on how to select a good agency for your ads, they're in the business of looking for an agency to run their ads. So it was like a good lead in for us. That's one example. Another way that we used to go about it is, I don't know if you remember this years ago, but there was a time, kind of like now, but worse back then, where everybody and their mother was losing their ad accounts. Like Facebook was just arbitrarily bringing down Thor's hammer and deciding that if you even look funny, smash you, you're done, your ad account is done. So I know this is a long name, but we had a lead magnet that we put out there and some content that we put out there. Basically, like we called it Facebook Apocalypse, and it was the guide to not losing your ad account, right? And I put it all out on the line. I was like, because the people who are going to benefit from this are going to love me. I think we did like 60,000 downloads in a year of this guide, and it basically walked people through XYZ. But here's the part that people don't get that I intentionally reverse engineered. If somebody is looking up a guide on how not to lose their ad account, what do you think has probably already happened, right? They've lost their ad account, right? They're not preemptively looking at that stuff. They're looking at it as a reaction to what happened in their reality. So it's great because a lot of people would read the guide. I'd have a call to action in the guide that says, hey, if you want to talk about how to never lose an ad account again and blah, 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 you can speak to us. And we had so many people just reach out to us and be like, I don't know what to do. I don't have an ad account. And so we walk them through how to get a new ad account, how to keep it clean, how to never lose it. And of course, that meant more clients for us. So I think it's also important, Chase, to that point, where if we're going to put out content, and you nailed it best, it's the content has to be directly linked to our offer, and the content has to understand what the actual pains and problems that our ideal prospect is going through, and links that back to how we can help them. Because the one way I did this wrong was I released a lead magnet years ago called the perfect ad template. And I showed people how to essentially my 10-stage ad writing formula. That was how to write the perfect ad. And I use this to try and get agency clients. Do you already see the disconnect there, right? If someone downloads a content piece on how to write great ads, they're not looking for somebody else to write great ads for them. It's for themselves. And so there's a huge disconnect there. And that one fell flat on its face. Everyone loved the lead magnet, just got me 0 clients. So I think there's some intentional thought that has to be put around. It's like, if I know that my client is XYZ and they have XYZ problems, and if I could solve that problem, they're most likely going to take some next steps with us. That is the better content piece than just arbitrarily throwing out random content.
That's a really good point. And that's a really fine line to figure out, right? Don't make content for somebody who's trying to DIY it.
Yes, especially for an agency. Yeah.
The scenario of the people that are looking for help.
Exactly.
That's really interesting. I also love being timely. As an example, you were smart enough to realize, hey, this is something that's happening in this moment in time. People's ad accounts are getting shut down or whatever. Let's make content around that, which immediately triggered my mind to start thinking about AI, right? If I work with chiros, I could come up with something of like, what AI is going to do to the chiropractic industry that I'm sure every chiro would be interested to check out.
Yeah.
And if it's about automating scheduling or like generating images on demand, like that's all services that we can now provide, especially through high level. So that got my gears turning immediately.
Yeah. I think what's important there too is that, like, if you're going to catch a wave, fortunately, we were some of the first to catch the wave on the ad account thing. So we were leading the pack and everyone else was considered a follower to us. With the whole chat GPT and AI and all that kind of stuff going on, now everybody and their mother teaches that stuff. So if you're going to move into that space, I think it's important. I call it the preeminence framework, and kind of picture a 2-circle Venn diagram. I say that the key to any funnel, like it's the difference between so I drive a nice fancy sports car. I think it makes things fun and my life fun and whatever. But if you have the car, but you have like a 1982 Pinto engine in the car, you're not maximizing the value of the car or what it can do for you, right? It's all body, it's all show. My friend in the fitness industry calls it DMO, like display model only. When he's talking about guys who work out, some people are just DMO, they're not functionally well. Same sort of thing. It's like, if all you do is focus on the funnel or the ads, that's DMO. Like, that's display model only. Yes, it's cool and it looks fancy and there's a nice body to it, but what's actually driving the engine in between? So what I'd say is the engine that drives in between is what I call the preeminence framework. And I'm borrowing that term from Jay Abraham, preeminence. But the idea is if you have a two-circle Venn diagram like this, on one end, it's your positioning. And on the other side, it's your promise or your offer. And the clash in between the two is really what sets you apart and is the engine that drives the actual funnel itself. So let me give you an example real quick, if it makes sense. Let's say a dude graduated out of economics, out of college for economics, and he's 21 years old, and he starts his own financial advice, kind of business. If that person gave you the advice of like, play the long-term game, only invest in, downward markets, blah, 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 you'd be like, cool, but whatever. But if Warren Buffett came along and gave you the exact same advice, exact same word for word advice, who would you more likely listen to? Obviously Warren Buffett. Why? Because he has the experience, but he holds positioning in our mind as a leader or a thought leader or an expert in that particular field. Another good example of this is when J.K. Rowling wrote a book after Harry Potter. She wrote a book under a pen name and it went out into the marketplace and sold a couple thousand copies. No biggie. Then word got out that it was actually J.K. Rowling. So she switched the name on the cover, put it on, and now it sold thousands and became a bestseller. Same content, same title, same page count, same book, same character, same everything. What was the difference? You put J.K. Rowling's name versus a pen name, and all of a sudden it's elevated. So there's something to say about understanding how to generate positioning in your marketplace to be a category leader, to be in category of one. And you couple that with an extremely good offer. So for example, in my world, one of our in our consulting business, not our agency business, we show people how to build funnels in high level to generate higher volume of qualified calls at less cost. That's our big promise out there. But everybody and their mother says that. So outside of my positioning, my promise is if we don't generate more calls at less cost for you, not only do you not pay, but I cut you a $5,000 check. You have zero way to lose and only way to gain. So that offer sweetens the deal a little bit. And now between the two, now we have a really strong offer out to the marketplace. So I say that to say, like, if you've not that you've missed, it's brand new. The AI stuff is all brand new, but because everybody's blah, 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 chitter chattering about it, I would advise if you're we're going after chiropractors or whatever, think about that preeminent framework where when you do come to the marketplace, the chiropractor can't turn to you and say, oh, I saw Joe kind of making the same promise, right? You've got to think about how to package it and position it and make a promise that really elevates it and helps it stand out. And then you're in a blue ocean. Then the game is so much easier.
So to take what you just said and apply it, it's really, really interesting. Here's where my head is at.
Yeah.
Earlier, you talked about sort of stacking the deck in your favor.
Sure.
And if you do that, it's pretty easy to make a crazy offer. Like, I'll give you $5,000 if I don't deliver.
Yes. Right.
Because you're only taking people you're certain that you can deliver for. Right. So how do my gears are spinning of like, okay, how would I do that for my clients? Right. If I'm working with a chiro and it's like, what are the conditions that you're going to win in?
Yeah.
And then just make a better guarantee, man, because it'll help your ad stand out.
Yeah.
And there's really no fear there because if they have to qualify for the thing that you're guaranteeing, right?
Well, and that's exactly it. So at the core of it, I think for any agency looking for a client, let's just use a chiro as an example because we've been talking about that. Like at the end of the day, you don't want to assume what the chiro wants, because many people assume, oh, a chiro just wants more clients. Of course they want more clients, but everyone's promising them more clients. What do they actually want? Maybe they want to avoid insurance pay and only go cash pay. Maybe they want to avoid offering the first $20 initial chiropractic adjustment. They're just done with that. Maybe it's not actually getting more consultations. It's getting more people to show up for consultations, because chiros have a great time of saying, yeah, I could book 30 consults, but only 4 show up. And that's a great frustration. So the point I'm trying to make is, don't assume that we know what our clients actually want. Find out what they actually want, because everybody else is saying, oh, chiro, I'll get you more clients. I'll get you more clients. But if you come in the scene and say, no, we'll take your 4% show up rate and turn it into an 80% show up rate, because you've got some cool like tactic or whatever that can help do that through high level with the follow-ups and all that, like you win. There's no and like, okay, if you can't say from 4% to 80%, what if you say we'll double your show up rate from 4% to 8%? Could you say that?
And then let me connect this dot, because I hear this fear from people all the time in conversations.
Yeah.
If you stack the deck, right? So you're saying, okay, in order to qualify for my $5,000 guarantee, you have to be willing to do text message marketing. You have to be willing to let me change the number on your site. You have to be willing to this, that, da, 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 da. And if you're not willing, okay, great. You don't qualify for 5K guarantee, but I can still help you. Do you still want to work together?
Yes.
And I feel like there's so much fear in there, but you can make that so cut and dry. And it works in your favor, right? I want the guarantee. Well, then you got to listen to what I'm telling you. You got to do everything on my list.
Yeah. Yeah. I think a lot of agency owners in general, sales, that is afraid of the takeaway. And what I mean by that is, like, when I go into a sales conversation, this might be really bad business practice. And if it comes across that way, please note that these are just the views held by Nicholas Kusmich and not Chase or Go High Level or anybody. These are just my views. Like, I actually go, and I don't do sales for our consulting business, but I do have the initial conversation once our salespersons talk to them and triage them. I do have the initial conversation for our agency. And it is my intention when I go into that conversation to talk them out of doing business with me, because I actually want to see where they're actually at. Because, I mean, we have a pretty good reputation. So people just assume that, and again, I hear this all the time. They're like, oh, if we work with Nick, we'll get a 30,000% ROI. It's like, I didn't say that. I didn't say that. Our website says we've done that much, but that's not for you. Like, I don't know what your numbers are. So, you know, there is something important to what you said about the takeaway and saying, and we have that all the time, because in our guarantee, I'd say 60 to 70% of the people we talk to qualify for the guarantee. So then we can offer it to them. The other 60%, our sales team is very upfront in saying, hey, look, this guarantee has conditions on it and you don't meet those conditions, but we could still help you. And they say, well, if I can't have the guarantee, I mean, ultimately it's like, well, maybe this isn't for you. If you're looking for a guarantee without any conditions and you don't have a business that actually generate these results, you're smoking something. Like, it's just not going to happen. So either you're going to continue to search for someone who's going to offer you something that's going to either let you down, or we have a proven system here. I can't guarantee it, but I'm going to give you the best fighting chance to make it work. Like, does that make sense for you? And again, I think part of it is just the upfrontness about the reality. And I think that's another big thing that we really pride ourselves on is, and I have to do this intentionally, because when people come to us, they hear the high ROIs and, oh, we're going to get such great results. And they'll ask me, like, what do you think is going to happen? And I'm like, frankly, in the first 30 days, maybe nothing. Like, are you okay with that? Like, let's just talk reality here, that again, Facebook ads are not pixie dust that you just, shovel around. There's some metrics we got to look at where there's things we need to make sure that are working. And if we do those things, I guarantee results. But if you don't do those things, I can't be held liable for you not wanting to do what it actually takes to get the results. So I love that you shared that. Like, don't be afraid of taking it away and telling them the reality.
And I love the sort of reverse psychology that you mentioned. It reminded me of Qasim Aslam. I don't know if you know him, but they have a Google Ads agency, and his sales calls go similar. They hop on and they say, okay, we're going to tell you all the reasons why you shouldn't hire us.
I love that.
And they just go down the list. And it's like, it just flips the script, right? And I think that's exactly sort of what you're saying is, and I love it. And if somebody passes your filters and is willing to commit to the whole shebang, then sure, you can make the guarantee.
Right.
Because then if you look at it, it's like, guys, your response times were over an hour. The condition was 20 minutes or, 5 minutes or less.
Right.
You know what I mean? So
right.
I love that strategy. And I think for hopefully a lot of people listening, it will alleviate some of those fears of being able to do better sales if you do it in the right way.
Yeah. And there's always a question. I get this all the time. It's like, well, what if you have to refund them? Then you have to refund them. You messed up. Like, you didn't live to your end of the thing. So you don't deserve that money, and that person's entitled to their money back. Cause so the next question I get is, how often does that happen? The reality is very little, right?
Sure.
I mean, yes, it can happen. And if it does, own it. That's okay. But again,
when it happens, I'm imagining you go back and see, okay, how did this happen? Do I need to refine my filter or add a new filter, or did we just screw this up?
Yeah. Yeah. And again, I love that. And like, I think one of the things that we harp on, so I have two schools of thought on this. Like, some of my close friends are like, if you don't live to the letter of the law of the agreement, like, you don't get the refund. It doesn't matter because you haven't lived to it. And then, back in the day, Kern was a good friend of mine, and he's like, dude, if anyone asks for he literally is like, dude, if if anyone asks for a refund, no questions asked, just give it to them. I don't want the headache or the energy of having to deal with it. And so like, I've had to wrestle with that a little bit over the years, because like part of me is like, in the internet marketing world, there's so many shysters like trying to take advantage of you. Like total side note, like I used to sell a course, and some of the highest level people out there who run ads, everybody knows who they are, biggest, big faces, and they buy your program. In 48 hours, they ask for a refund. They just wanted the free program and qualify for the refund. And like, so I'd sit there and I'd wrestle with that. It's like, well, you're just being a shyster. Like, I'm happy to refund you if you actually qualify for the refund, but now you're just trying to get free stuff. Plus you're a big name and you're talking about all this stuff that you're doing. So like, I've had to deal with that a little bit, but I think that's the poison you have to pick. On the one hand, if they qualify for a refund, no problem, grant it, walk away, move on, don't carry the, if they don't qualify for the refund, but they're really harping on it, I think that's a decision that we as business owners have to think about, of like, you just get that off your plate and not think about the energy that carries with it. And you do them right, because maybe even if they never end up working with you, they'll end up telling somebody and say, you know what, my experience with Kern was a great one. Like I was
going to say, I can think of scenarios where it's like, yeah, you did qualify for this refund, but we were actually pretty close. Would you like us to take that 5K and just put it into your ad spend next month? Because we're really confident that in this next 30 days, we're going to make a couple of tweaks and it's going to crush.
Right.
Stuff like that. It doesn't have to mean that it's over. You know what I mean?
Yeah. That's a great way to look at it. And I think, again, one of the keys to our quote unquote success, I think on the agency level, is like, we're a month by month retainer. But one of the things we tell people straight out of the bat is like, look, you're not locked into anything. So we have an open 30-day reoccurring thing. We always have a conversation on day 28 and we see how things are going. And we trust that you will stay with us if you're getting the results that you want. And if you're not, then no pen on a piece of paper should have you forced into this relationship for another 3 months anyways. And like, something as small as that is like, people take a breath of fresh air, but like, agencies have always been told, lock them in for 6 months. And like, do you want that headache if things are going to the shitter anyway? Like,
it's not even realistic. So, like, the idea that you're going to hold someone to the letter of a contract in this day and age, it's just fantasy anyway.
Yeah. Or you use your results to keep them as a client. Right? Like that's another way to look at it. And like, granted, so we only deal with Meta, and we've lost some clients over the years who we've gotten incredible results for, but they're like, we moved on to another agency who for the same price does YouTube, Google, and Facebook. And like, that was kind of a shot in the gut to us, because we're like, man, we've taken you so far, we've scaled your business, and you're just moving on to someone who, because they can do more platforms for the same price, of moving on. But like that's business. Like, that's just, it is what it is. So you move on, you say next, because I mean, if you adhere to, now we're getting into mindset stuff, but like, if you adhere to the reality that there's an abundance of potential clients for you, then you'll never get caught up with an old one that's just going to be like holding you down. You just move on to the next one and you make it happen.
And I would bet that you've had people leave on for what they thought were greener pastures and come back.
Right? That's true. And then you have that interesting, like, business owner dilemma of, do you take them back? Right. because oftentimes they would leave, not maliciously or anything like that, but they kind of with a bit of an attitude, like, I'm going to do this over there. And we've had tons, like many come back to us and see, like, would you work with us? And frankly, and we put this in our agreements now. I don't even know why, and I don't want it to come across as sleazy, but our agreement is like, if you're working with us now, our rates change over the years. And so if you do leave and come back to us, there is a reactivation fee, which is going to be more expensive than what you're currently paying with us now. So just keep that in mind. And so we've had people come back to us and pay now double to work with us because of the reactivation and where we are in our business today. But they gladly pay it because, heck, they tried something else and it just didn't work out. So there's like things to think about from a retention standpoint or a reactivation
I love that.
standpoint.
I call that one the ego tax.
Yeah.
I'll humble myself, but you're going to pay a little bit more for that.
Yeah. I like it. Yeah. And it is an ego thing, like, granted, but there is something to say there. Like, we call it reactivation, but again, there's just a lot of things to think about, obviously, from a retention / onboarding standpoint, which by the way, for all agency people, I'm in the new client acquisition business, right? That's what paid ads are. But I'll tell you straight up front that that's the most difficult part of the business, because retaining clients is a much easier way to grow your revenue than getting new ones. Like, the cost to acquire is far more expensive than the cost to keep. And I think a lot of business owners, particularly agency owners, are just focusing on, where's my next client going to come from? Where's my next client going to come from? Rather than thinking, how can I create such an incredible experience for our clients that they don't want to go anywhere and they're just going to be with us forever? Because that's a far easier thing to play there.
100%. And I always advise young agency owners getting into paid ads, saying, don't go at it if you're not going to handle the backside. And I don't know, if I'm curious to know, do you guys work on the funnel and the nurture automation and all that, or is it just part of your filter? We only work with businesses that have automated nurture in place. Show it to me. I'll advise you on how you should improve it, but you need to do that before you work with us.
Yeah, I love that. So when we started, yes, we were involved in the funnel, and I had a dev team and people who can push the buttons and make all that work. And then we realized, again, that's just not our field of play. We could do it, but the amount of stress and headache to take a busted funnel and make it better versus just working with a great funnel and me then jumping in. And I think that's a key thing with the leverage points. For a business, the size and capacity that we work with, a piece of advice that I give to them is worth tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. Right. That exact same piece of advice to someone who's just getting started is worth maybe 10 or 15 bucks if they do anything with it. Right. So now, for our context, when we work with a customer or client, it's part of our filtration process. If you don't have your numbers dialed in and working, we won't work with you. If they're working, I will help make them better. But I can't take you from 0 to hero. I take you from, again, we don't start, we scale. And that's allowed us to really just focus and narrow in on where we can deliver the most amount of value to our clients.
I could talk all day. I feel like we could go on forever, but I would like to ask you one question, because I feel like, I've been in this seat before, working with local clients, lower ticketed spend.
Sure.
High level can drastically improve that scenario. Yes. But, if you're doing lead gen services, there's always going to be that high churn rate. Hearing somebody like you talk, it's almost like a fantasy. What would you say to an agency like that? That's sounds great, but it's a world away from my clients. How do you go from the same old client that you've been working with for 6 years to elevating to clients at the caliber that you only decide to work with?
Yeah, I love the question. And I think the first question is, do you want to? Right. I know in theory, it's of course I want to. I'd rather charge 15 grand a month than $300 a month. Of course I would. And there's but I always warn entrepreneurs of the allure of hearing someone else and how they've done it and modeling it. Yes, there are patterns to be matched, of course. But it doesn't mean it's always right for you, because the benefit of, let's say, just working with chiropractors or local pizza shops or whatever, is that once you've templated the process, now it's a volume game. Right. And that's the benefit I don't have. I don't have a templated process, because all of our clients are different. And so there's a whole heap of work that's involved in that process. If I was only working with chiropractors and I know that my process works, now I just go from township to township to township and say, I don't really have to do anything. High level's doing all the work for me. It's all pre-built. It's all built in, just give them a sub account with everything already done. Couple modifications.
Same ad's going to work for the same chiro or for the next chiro.
You're just going to change it and say, hey, Iowa, instead of, whatever. So that's another question, is there's a couple ways to look at it. Some people have this battle of high ticket versus low ticket. Let's charge more for bigger clients. And I like that. That's a model that we've adhered to, and it was great. But you can achieve the same kind of income, if you will, by playing a volume game over here. And the volume game is much easier if you're niched and focused and you're just duplicating templates out. So I think the first question is do you really want to? Or are you just thinking the grass is greener, and then you come over to this side and you're oh, that had all of its heap of problems as well too. I should have stuck with the chiros over there. So that's the first question. But if you do really in your heart of hearts are feeling like it, I think Dan Sullivan is the one who said it years ago, the role of the entrepreneur is to stack wins in their favor to continue to build their confidence, right? The name of the game for the entrepreneur is confidence. You lose confidence, that's the whole world falls apart. You gain confidence and everything, works better. And I think it's Hormozi who talks about like stacking little wins to just reiterate that you are consistent with your word and you can deliver the results that you're delivering. So in my case, and I actually had this conversation with my wife the other night, who works in the business with me, and it's like, how did we go from back in the day charging, I think it was like $500, $1,000 a month per client, to now charging in excess of 10, 15, 20 grand a month? Like that's a big gap. Now, granted, it took a decade, so it didn't happen overnight. But when we nailed it down, it was simply just understanding two things. Maybe we'll throw that out there. Number one, that it is a confidence game. Like the more you sharpen your sword, the more you throw the, you throw the archery thing at the target, the more you practice, the more the more like layups you do, the more skills you obtain, the more confident you are in your ability to deliver a result. Right. So for the person who's starting, there's no way you're going to charge 20 grand out of the gates, because you just don't have this. You might have the skill, but you don't have the confidence. So step one is to build that confidence. I think that's important. I think the second realization, and this is more of a mindset thing than anything, it's recognizing that no matter what you charge, there is a business out there who will pay it, no matter what you charge. I've heard some crazy people like in the relationship coaching industry charging 120 grand a year to coach people on the relationships. And people will think like, that's a soft sell. There's no ROI attached to that. How the heck can they charge 120 grand? Well, when you're dealing with, let's call it like billionaires who are on their fourth marriage and their whole relationship is falling apart, they'll pay whatever the heck they want to find love.
Yeah.
So when you understand the mindset that whatever you charge, no matter what that price is, there is a business out there who's willing to pay for it. You just have to find out who that is and then tailor your offer, your offering, your business to meet that need. Then you could start stepping yourself up, the cost ladder, if you will. And again, the more you build the confidence, the more you understand, the more you work with people who have bigger budgets and have greater results, you help them out, and you just kind of stair step that until you're at to the point where your mind starts to say, geez, like what can I charge? And you hit your own limit and then just stay there. But I will say this as a way to tie this up, because Chase, I hear people all the time, like in the high ticket world, they're just like, just triple your fees. Like it's that easy. Just triple your, like, here's one thing I do know is when I tried to take that advice way, way, way back, and they're like, oh, you charge $5,000, charge $2,000, no, $500, charge $2,000 a month now. I was like, okay, that's what they said. And I got on my first sales call with my new price. The person on the other end completely recognizing when you're not in alignment with what you're talking about. Like when you have your own fears and your own thing, like, oh God, I was like, I can't say this with confidence. My good friend, Dan Martell, says that on a sales call, he who has the most confidence wins. And if you have the confidence that you can deliver the result and you know it because you've tried and tested and true, you could demand whatever price you want. But if you're not sure about that, don't start demanding prices that you are not confident and aligned with, because the other person on the other end will smell that a mile away and they'll be like, you don't seem so good. So, I mean, I don't know if we answered the question there, Chase, but hopefully it's helpful to think about, escalating up the cost ladder there a little bit.
I think we did. And I think we covered a lot of great nuggets today that hopefully everybody watching and listening will take away and be able to apply to their business. Nick, do you help, obviously you help businesses. Do you also help agencies who, if people are listening and they want to learn more from you, where can they head?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the short answer is yes, we help agencies because we help, on the consulting side of it, our primary person that we can help is someone who has a high value offer. So someone who sells a service that's not a few bucks, but a few $1,000s or has a lifetime value of 5,000 or more, who generally requires sales calls to be able to convert them, because you're not going to convert a $10,000 person outside of the phone. And so agency owners, just like a lot of coaches and experts and mastermind holders, fit into that category well. And the part that I love most about that is that I'm an agency owner myself. So I get it and I know it and I know what works and I know what we do. So yes, we do help agency owners. I think there's two things that people could do if it makes sense. One is going to nicholaskusmich.co. Fortunately, or unfortunately, I'm the only Nicholas Kusmich in the world. But unfortunately, it's a very difficult name to spell. So if you can figure out the spelling, nicholaskusmich.co. You can subscribe to my newsletter there. And I just put out a lot of great content and you can stay attached and hear some stuff and all the rest of that. And then Chase, the other URL is a little bit tricky, but I could give it to you that you can maybe include in the show notes or something. And that's for the agencies who actually want to use our systems, which is all high level based, by the way, but who wants to use our systems to actually get more qualified sales appointments at less cost, 100% guaranteed, or you don't pay, and I cut you a $5,000 check if it doesn't work. We'll have a link there that people can explore that if they want to as well.
Awesome. We'll be sure to include that in the description below. So if you're watching, it should be there. Nick, thank you so much for coming on.
Oh no, Jay, thanks for, I'm so glad we got to talk agency stuff, because it's been a while. And I hope if anything, some agency folks just got to take what we talked about here today, start applying it, and then come back to you and say, hey, we're doing better and we're getting great results. I would love to hear something like that.
I'm sure that they will. Thanks everyone for watching. We'll see you in the next one.